What would you do if the person who was supposed to protect your career tried to steal the most important day of your life, and didn't even feel sorry about it? My name is Priya Nolan. I am a senior client relations manager at a mid-sized marketing firm called Brentwell Group. I had worked there for 9 years. 9 years of early mornings, late nights, missed dinners and cancelled plans. I built the client retention system the entire company depended on. I trained the junior staff. I handled the accounts that brought in 60% of our monthly revenue. I was the person everyone called when something broke, when a client threatened to leave, when a deadline felt impossible. I never said no. I never dropped a task. I showed up even when I was sick, even when I was exhausted, even when I had every reason to stay home. My name is Priya, and for 9 years I gave that company everything I had. I believed that loyalty was a two-way street. I believed that if you worked hard enough, protected enough, sacrificed enough, the people above you would eventually see your worth and treat you accordingly. I was wrong. I did not find that out slowly. I found it out on the most important morning of my life, standing in front of a mirror, wearing my wedding dress, with my veil pinned perfectly and my heart so full it almost hurt. That was the moment my phone rang. The call came at 8:47 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I had been watching the clock, counting down to the 11 o'clock ceremony. My bridesmaids were laughing in the next room. My mother was adjusting the flowers on the table by the window. My fiancé, Felix Okafor, was getting ready across town with his brothers, and he had sent me a voice note 20 minutes earlier just to say he could not wait to see me walk down the aisle. Everything was perfect. Then my phone buzzed. The name on the screen was Roland Fitch. My boss. I almost did not answer. I wish I had trusted that instinct. Picked up. His voice was flat, completely unbothered, like he was calling about a misplaced file and not interrupting a bride on her wedding morning. Priya, he said. The Caldwell account presentation is today. I need you in the office by 10. I actually laughed. I thought it was a mistake. Roland, today is my wedding day. You approved my leave 4 months ago. There was a short pause. Then he said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. If you don't show up today, don't bother coming back. I stopped breathing. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The dress, the veil, the flowers in my hair, and my hands suddenly shaking. Felix called while I was still standing frozen by the window. I could hear the happiness in his voice before I even spoke, and that made everything worse. I told him what Roland had said. The silence that followed was heavy in a way I had never heard from Felix before. He was always calm, always steady. But in that silence, I could feel him trying to hold himself together for my sake. Don't go, he said quietly. Priya, please. Don't go. I wanted to listen. Every part of me wanted to pull off my heels, walk back to my bridesmaids, and pretend the call never happened. But then the numbers started moving through my head. The venue deposit, the catering bill, the honeymoon we had put on a shared credit card. Felix had just started his own small business 8 months earlier. My salary was carrying us. If I lost my job that morning, we would be behind on rent within 6 weeks. I had no backup plan. I had given 9 years to one company. I had not updated my resume since I was promoted. I had no savings buffer large enough to survive a gap. Felix said, "Don't go," and I believed he meant it with everything in him. But I also knew he did not fully see the numbers the way I saw them. I told him I was sorry. I told him I loved him. Then I picked up my bag. I got into a cab at 9:15. Still in my wedding dress. I had not even thought to change. My mind was moving too fast and too slow at the same time. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror and then looked away politely. About 3 blocks in, he spoke. Big day. I did not answer right away. Yes, I finally said. Supposed to be. He did not ask anything else. I stared out the window at the city moving past, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not anger, not sadness exactly, but a kind of numbness, the kind that comes when something so wrong is happening that your brain cannot fully accept it yet. My phone kept lighting up. My mother. My maid of honor, Tolu. Felix's sister, Amara. I turned the screen face down. I could not read those messages yet. I needed to hold myself together long enough to get through whatever Roland had decided was more important than my wedding. The cab pulled up outside Brentwell Group at 9:38. I paid, stepped out onto the pavement, and stood there for one moment looking at the building. 9 years I had walked through those doors. Today I was walking through them in a wedding dress, carrying a bridal clutch, and trying very hard not to fall apart. I straightened my back and walked in. The lobby went quiet when I walked in. The security guard at the front desk looked up and blinked twice. The 2 junior assistants near the elevator froze mid-conversation. I kept my eyes forward and walked to the elevator like I did every other morning. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, the silence followed me. People turned in their chairs. Someone near the printer actually gasped. I heard a chair scrape. I heard whispering. I did not stop walking. Roland was standing near the glass-walled conference room, coffee in hand, jacket perfectly pressed. When he saw me, something moved across his face. I expected discomfort. I expected at least a flicker of guilt. Instead he smiled. Not a kind smile. Satisfied one. He raised his voice just enough so the whole floor could hear. "Glad you finally chose responsibility." The words landed like something cold. I heard a few people shift uncomfortably. I saw my colleague Bridget, who sat 3 desks from mine, press her lips together tightly. I saw Femi from accounts quietly look away. I stood in the middle of that open office in my wedding dress, in my wedding veil, and I felt something deep inside me crack. Not break, just crack. 'Cause I was still holding on. But the crack was there, and once something cracks, it never fully goes back. Roland wasted no time. He pointed me toward the conference room and handed me a thick folder before I had even sat down. Inside was a full client presentation for the Caldwell account, barely half finished, with notes scrawled in different handwriting. He wanted it completed, polished, and ready to deliver by 2 in the afternoon. 4 hours. Presentation that should have taken 2 days. I flipped through the pages and immediately saw the problem. Key data was missing. The revenue projections had errors. The formatting was inconsistent throughout. Someone had clearly started this work weeks ago and abandoned it. This had not been prepared this morning. This was not a sudden emergency. This had been sitting unfinished for a long time. I looked up at Roland. He was already walking away. I opened my mouth to ask why this had not been flagged earlier. Then I heard it. He was in the hallway just outside the glass wall, talking to someone from upper management in a low voice. He did not realize I could hear him clearly through the slightly open door. He said, and I remember every single word, "She'll finish it. She always does. She's too loyal to quit anyway." I sat very still. The folder was open in front of me. The presentation was unfinished. My wedding was happening without me across town. And I now understood something with complete and terrible clarity. This was never an emergency. This was control. A work. I do not fully understand why, except that shutting down and focusing was the only way I knew to survive the next few hours without completely falling apart in front of everyone. I pulled up the data files. I corrected the projections. I rebuilt the formatting from scratch. My fingers moved on autopilot while the rest of me was somewhere else entirely. At 11:03 my phone vibrated. I had left it face down, but I turned it over for just a moment. It was a photo from Tolu. She had sent it without a caption. It was a picture of the venue. The white chairs were set up in perfect rows. The aisle was lined with the small candles Felix and I had chosen together. The arch at the front was covered in the cream and dusty rose flowers I had spent 3 weekends deciding on. And the aisle was empty. The guests were standing around the edges, looking confused. Felix was not in the photo. I put the phone back down. I stared at the screen in front of me. A spreadsheet full of numbers that did not matter to anyone whose life actually counted. I did not cry. I wanted to. Instead, I pressed my hands flat on the desk, took one long breath and kept working. Because if I cried, Roland would see it. And I refused to let him see it. The presentation was finished by 1:45. I sent it to Roland and sat back in my chair, exhausted in a way that went past tired. He reviewed it for 10 minutes, then walked back into the conference room. He did not say thank you. He did not acknowledge the quality of the work. He stood at the head of the table, shuffled the pages, and then looked over at me with 2 members of upper management still in the room. "This structure is weak in the second section," he said loudly. "Maybe if you spent less time thinking about weddings and more time thinking about your work, it would not need this much correction." One of the managers gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. The other looked at his laptop. I looked at Roland. Not with tears, not with panic. I looked at him with the clearest eyes I had ever used in that building. Something had shifted in me. I was not afraid of him anymore. Fear requires uncertainty. And I was no longer uncertain about who Roland Fitch was. He was a man who used people carefully and discarded them whenever it suited him. He had shown me that on purpose in front of witnesses on my wedding day. And in doing that, he had made a mistake he did not yet understand. I nodded slowly, said nothing, and closed my folder. I left the office at 4:30 still in my wedding dress. I had nowhere specific to go, so I went home. Felix was there. He had gone back to our apartment after the ceremony was cancelled. He opened the door when he heard my key and just looked at me for a long moment. We did not say much. He made tea. I sat on the couch still in the dress because somehow changing felt like admitting something I was not ready to admit yet. We sat together in the quiet for a long time. Around 8 o'clock that night, my phone buzzed with a message from a coworker named Wura. She sat 4 desks from mine and had worked at Brentwell for 6 years. We were friendly but not close. Her message was short. "Check your email. Few of us saw everything today. You need to see this." I almost did not open it. I was so empty by that point that I genuinely considered putting the phone down and going to sleep. But something made me open the email app. There was a message from an address I did not recognize. No subject line. Just an attachment. Video file. My hands were steady as I pressed play. The footage was grainy, slightly angled, clearly recorded on someone's phone pointed at a security monitor. But the image was clear enough. It showed Roland standing in the hallway near his office, talking and laughing. And then I heard what he was saying. I sat up straight. The video was 43 seconds long. I watched it 4 times. In it, Roland was talking to someone just off camera. He was relaxed, confident, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He said, clearly enough to hear every word, "I made her choose. She came in, didn't she? People like her need to be controlled. Give them too much flexibility and they stop being useful." He laughed after he said it. The person off camera said something unclear. Roland shrugged and added, "She's not going anywhere. Where would she even go?" I sat on that couch, still in my wedding dress, and I felt something move through me that was entirely different from the grief and exhaustion I had been carrying all day. It was clarity. The same kind of cold, focused clarity you feel when the fog finally lifts and you see the road ahead with perfect sharpness. He had not called me in because the company needed me. He had called me in to prove that he could. He wanted to remind himself and me that he held the power, that I was manageable, that my life outside that building was irrelevant whenever it inconvenienced him. For the first time since 8:47 that morning I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I now had exactly what I needed. I replied to Wura's message that night. She responded within minutes, and what followed surprised me completely. She had not acted alone. Over the next hour, messages came in from 5 other colleagues. Quiet ones. The people who sat in the back rows, who never spoke loudly in meetings, who processed everything carefully and said very little. People I had barely had full conversations with, but who had apparently been watching Roland for a long time. Wura sent me a folder. Inside it was more than I expected. There were screenshots of emails where Roland had taken credit for work done by junior staff. There were saved messages where he had threatened a young analyst named Kofi with a poor performance review if he raised a complaint with HR. There were records showing Roland had blocked 2 internal promotion applications without explanation. There were 3 separate accounts from former employees who had left quietly and never said publicly why. I had thought I was the only one absorbing his behavior. I was not. I was simply the most recent. And apparently, for the people in that quiet network, watching him do what he did to me on my wedding day in front of the whole floor in front of witnesses, was the moment they decided enough was enough. One message from a colleague named Bayo said it simply. We were waiting for the right moment. You just gave it to us. We created a private group that same night. There were 7 of us. Wura, Bayo, Kofi, a compliance analyst named Zara, a senior copywriter named Ife, a project coordinator named Simi, and me. We were careful. We did not rush. We spent 3 days organizing everything into a clear, documented record. Every piece of evidence was labeled, dated, and cross-referenced. Kofi, who had studied law before switching careers, structured it all so that it followed proper documentation format. Zara, who worked in compliance, cross-checked every item against Brentwell's internal conduct policies. She flagged 7 separate violations. Not just ethical ones. Policy violations with clear consequences written into the company handbook. The kind that HR could not dismiss with a quiet conversation and a verbal warning. The kind that required formal investigation. Bayo said it one evening in the group chat, and none of us disagreed. We don't just report this. We make sure it cannot be buried. Afe, who had the sharpest mind for strategy in the group, said, there are 2 steps. Internal first, then external if they try to silence it. We all agreed. And I went back to work the next morning like nothing had changed. I smiled at Roland when I passed his office. He smiled back completely relaxed. He believed he had won. That was exactly what we needed him to believe. The next 5 days were the strangest of my life. On the outside, I was the same Priya I had always been at work. I arrived on time. I completed my tasks cleanly. I responded to Roland's requests without visible resistance. I even sat through a team meeting where he presented the Caldwell account work as a team success without mentioning my name once, and I nodded along like it was perfectly normal. It required more self-control than anything I had ever done professionally. But I understood the strategy. The moment Roland sensed any shift in me, he would become defensive. He might start covering his tracks. He might alter records or speak to HR first to frame the situation in his favor. Giving him no reason to be alert was the most important thing we could do. Meanwhile, our group was finalizing everything. Zara completed her compliance cross-reference. Kofi organized the documentation into a formal complaint package. Wura collected signed statements from 2 former employees who had agreed to contribute. Ife drafted the external communication plan. And Simi, who had a background in media from a previous career, quietly identified the right channels. On day 5 everything was ready. We reviewed it together one final time. Then Ife said, before we go formal, we let the public see enough to make sure this cannot be ignored. We released the first piece the following morning. Simi handled the first post. She had a secondary anonymous account she had created specifically for situations where workplace misconduct needed public visibility without exposing the source too early. She posted a short clip, 60 seconds, no names, no company name. Just a description over plain text. A boss called his employee on her wedding morning and told her to come in or lose her job. She came in her wedding dress. Here is what he said about her afterward. Underneath that text, she attached the audio from the video. Just the audio. Roland's voice saying clearly, I made her choose. People like her need to be controlled. That was it. No names, no company. Just the truth in his own voice. She posted it at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. By 8 o'clock it had 4,000 views. By noon it had climbed past 40,000. By the time I arrived at the office that morning and sat down at my desk, the comments section was already flooded. People were furious. They were sharing it. They were tagging journalists. They were asking who this boss was and where he worked. Roland had no idea. He walked past my desk at 9:30 and gave me his usual tight nod. Gave him mine. Inside I was completely still. The wave was already moving, and he was standing directly in its path. By Wednesday morning, the clip had passed 1 million views. I checked it from my phone in the bathroom at work, because I did not want anyone to see my expression when I saw the number. Comments were pouring in faster than anyone could read them. People sharing their own stories. Human resources professionals explaining exactly which laws had potentially been violated. Employment lawyers offering free consultations in the comments. Journalists from 3 different outlets had messaged the anonymous account asking for more information. Roland called an emergency team meeting at 10 o'clock that morning. He stood at the front of the room, visibly tense, and told us that a misleading and fabricated clip was circulating online that appeared to involve someone at our company. He said it was damaging, irresponsible, and likely the work of a disgruntled former employee. He looked around the room slowly, the way people do when they are trying to detect guilt without appearing to look for it. I held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked down at my notepad like I was taking notes. Wura across the room was doing the same. Roland told us that anyone with information about the clip should come to him directly. No one spoke. He dismissed us after 12 minutes. As I walked back to my desk, Bayo passed me in the hallway and said absolutely nothing. But he gave me the smallest nod. It was time for step 2. We released everything on Thursday at 7 o'clock in the morning. Not a clip. Not an audio excerpt. Everything. The full video. The emails. The documented pattern of conduct going back 18 months. The signed statements from former employees. Zara's compliance violation report, formatted and precise. Kofi's legal summary, which outlined 4 specific potential violations of workplace protection law. And one final addition, a photograph. It was a picture Bridget had taken on her phone that Saturday morning without telling anyone. It showed the full open-plan office, and in the center of it, in a white wedding dress, was me, sitting at a desk, working. The image was quiet and devastating in the way only true things can be. Aoife wrote a single paragraph to accompany the release. It named Roland Fitch. It named Brentwell Group. It linked to the full evidence folder hosted on a secure document platform. It ended with one sentence. This was not a bad day. This was a pattern. Within 2 hours, it was on the front page of 3 major online news platforms. By midday, Brentwell Group was trending. By afternoon, 2 of our largest clients had issued public statements saying they were reviewing their relationship with the company. Roland Fitch's name was everywhere. The office on Friday morning was almost unrecognizable. There were unfamiliar people near the executive floor. I later found out 2 of them were from the company's legal team and one was an external HR investigator. Emails from senior leadership had gone out the previous evening asking all staff to preserve records and avoid discussing the situation publicly. The company's social media accounts had gone quiet. Client relationship managers were fielding calls all morning. 3 major accounts had officially paused their contracts pending review. I sat at my desk and worked the same as always. Roland arrived late. He walked past without looking at anyone. His usual confidence was completely gone. He looked smaller somehow, like a person trying to take up less space. That afternoon, I was called into a meeting with the head of people operations, a woman named Cora, who I had spoken to only twice before. She was careful and professional. She told me that a formal investigation had been opened. She told me my documentation had been received. She asked if I felt safe in my current position. I told her the truth. I said I had felt unsafe for a long time but had believed nothing would change. Then I told her that I now believed something would, and that I intended to see the process through completely. She nodded and wrote something down. When I left the room, Roland was standing in the hallway. He looked directly at me. He waited until the floor had mostly cleared that evening. I was at my desk finishing a task when I heard his footsteps stop behind me. Turned slowly. His face was tight. His eyes were doing something I had not seen from him before. They were searching, uncertain, like someone who had walked into a room and suddenly could not find the door. "You did this," he said. It was not really a question. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I did not step toward him or away from him. I just looked at him the way I had looked at my reflection in that mirror on my wedding morning, calm, clear, and completely decided. "No," I said. "You did this. I just made sure it was documented." He started to speak again. His voice rose slightly, an edge of desperation underneath the anger. He said something about loyalty, about everything he had done for my career, about how I had misrepresented things. I let him finish. Then I picked up my bag and said, simply and quietly, "The investigation will sort out what happened. That is what it is for." I walked to the elevator. He did not follow. When the doors closed, I leaned back against the wall and took the first fully free breath I had taken since 8:47 on my wedding morning. Something was finally, permanently done. Roland Fitch was formally dismissed from Brentwell Group 12 days after the evidence was released. There was no announcement. His name simply stopped appearing in meeting invites and email threads, which is how corporate structures communicate the things they are too cautious to say directly. But that was not the end of it. The documentation Kofi had prepared was reviewed by an employment law firm representing 3 former Brentwell employees. Within 3 weeks, a formal legal complaint was filed. It cited wrongful use of authority, documented retaliation against employees who had raised concerns, and violations of workplace protection provisions that covered psychological pressure and coercive management. Roland's LinkedIn profile went quiet. His professional reputation, which he had built carefully over years of attending the right meetings and impressing the right people, collapsed within a month. The Caldwell account presentation, the one I had completed in a wedding dress while my ceremony was cancelled, was attributed publicly in the company's internal review to my individual effort. It became evidence, not of my obedience, but of the culture Roland had created. And the photograph, the one Bridget had taken without a word that Saturday morning. It had been shared over 2 million times. It was quiet, and it was accurate, and it said more than any caption ever could. Systems built on fear are always fragile. They fall the moment someone decides not to be afraid. A few weeks after everything settled, I stood in a small garden near the venue where my wedding was supposed to happen. Felix was beside me. We had rescheduled. It was a quieter plan this time, smaller, simpler, and somehow more ours than the original ever was. We were not in formal clothes yet. We were just standing there in the early morning, drinking coffee, watching the light come through the trees. I thought about what I wanted anyone watching this story to take away, because there are things I learned that I genuinely believe can protect someone else. The first is this: document everything. Not because you plan to use it, but because the truth needs a record to survive. The second is that silence protects the wrong person. Every colleague who stayed quiet before our group came together was not being neutral. They were allowing it to continue. The third is that loyalty without boundaries is not loyalty. It is fear with a different name. I gave 9 years to a company and nearly gave up my wedding day because I confused those two things. Do not make that mistake. And the last thing, the most important one, you are not alone. People around you are watching. Some of them are waiting for exactly what you have the courage to start. This story did not go viral because it was dramatic. It went viral because it was true. And truth, when it finally gets room to breathe, travels very far. If this story reached you, please like, comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.